It's the mid-1970s, 1975 Australia. You're a bit of a groovy man about town in the market for a new car. Chances are one of these would have been on your hot list. It's a 1975 XB John Goss Special Ford Falcon hardtop. Although this car is a 1975 XB Falcon, this body design arrived actually in 1972 as part of the XA Ford Falcon range. The XA was available as a four-door sedan, a family-sized wagon, a ute, and a few months later, this wonderful hardtop shape arrived. But first, a little Ford Falcon history. The first Ford Falcon arrived in Australia in 1960. It was based very tightly on a US market design, although it was made here. The second Falcon arrived in 1966, and once again, it was based on a US design. But Ford in America cancelled the Falcon for the 1970s, which meant Ford Australia had to do something to keep its family car alive for the 1970s. It had to style its own car. And part of that program was to style this lovely hardtop. Being a big two-door hardtop, a big part of the appeal, a big part of the style of this car is the big rear wheel arch. Now, legend has it that the car was actually styled originally to be a little bit narrower, but management at Ford Australia said, no, we want a wider rear wheel arch to fit a bigger tyre for racing.
10 seconds to go, signals the starter. Right. The national flag unfurled.
The counter
5 seconds to
number
go.
5 from the second row of the grid. John Goss will try and spear through. He makes a pretty good start. Let's watch him though. The field goes towards the start after his pass. Rocky made a bad start and is backing towards Rob Jane on the outside after Collarbone. But it's one first.
Under the bonnet of the John Goss Special was Ford's 302 cubic inch V8, 5 litres in the new money. This engine had 179 kilowatts, 240 horsepower. This engine was, by 1975, manufactured in Australia. Although it was based on a US design, Australia became the only place you could buy this engine. It also had a bigger brother in other models, a 351 cubic inch V8, which had about 200 kilowatts, a bit more power, a bit more cubes, a bit more grunt. Probably the biggest appeal, the thing that makes these cars so recognisable, is this lovely two-tone paint. Emerald Fire is the colour of the green, and there was also Hollow Blue. Interestingly, all these cars began life as either the blue or the green, and then this white, this beige, this lovely 1970s two-tone paint was applied later on. And of course, the finishing touch was this lovely orange pinstripe and the orange 302 detail. I reckon it's pretty cool. Like just about every other car, there's a particular body build plate on every Falcon ever made. And for this car, it's going to have the letters and the numbers, JG65RS, and a unique serial number. That gives us details of the fact that the car was made in Australia. It was made in Broadmeadows plant in Victoria. It's a 65, which means it's a Falcon 500 hardtop, the base model, which is what the John Goss Special was based on. R means 1975, S means July. There's a particular serial number, and the K means it's a V8. The John Goss Special was based on the base model Falcon hardtop, which means it's model 18313. But the real clues to a John Goss Special is the paint. It's either going to be Q for the green colour or S for the blue. The transmission will either be auto or manual, the only transmission option, which was L for manual or B for automatic. And the trim will be W for white. And the engine Y means it's a 302 cubic inch, the 4.9 litre V8. Anyway, enough about that history mumbo jumbo. Let's go for a drive. The XA Ford Falcon, of course, the XB and the XC that followed it were quite a simple technology package, just like every other car was in the 1970s. There was a double wishbone type front suspension, box type steering, leaf springs and a beam axle under the rear. That was pretty much the market average back in the day. of the big three back in the early 1970s, the big three Australian manufacturers, Chrysler, Holden and Ford. At least this car has disc brakes on the front, which goes a long way to helping it out under heavy braking situations. There were a lot of other cars in the 1970s that still had four-wheel drums, which don't work as well as disc brakes. Thankfully too, standard on the John Goss Special, and of course optional on other Fords, was power steering. These are quite big, heavy cars. Although they're not quite as heavy as today's cars, back in the day, these were a bit of a beast to manhandle without power steering. The power of these cars, the 302, was claimed to be 179 kilowatts. That's about 240 horsepower in the old money. One of the joys of owning a V8, any V8 of any era, is the noise. It might not suck the doors off a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, but who cares? A big part of the fun of one of these cars these days is just that V8 aura, that throb, that feather mattress of torque that just pushes you along without sort of too much effort. I love it. These Ford hardtops won at Bathurst in 1973, 74 and in 1977. The most significant win for this car was in 1977. Alan Moffat, Jackie Hicks, Colin Bond and Alan Hamilton brought two hardtops over the line in a beautiful 1-2 formation finish.
In what has been the most competitive, the fastest and the most international race we've seen here at the Mount Panorama circuit.
If you're a little kid back in the 1970s and you're a Holden fan, that was a really bad moment, but it's one of the most beautiful moments in Australian motorsport history.
An absolute demonstration of the crushing victory to Ford here and the Alan Moffat dealer team.
Driving one of these Falcon hardtops today is a mixture of fun and frustration, just as it is for any other Australian-made car of the 1970s. They're a bit loud, the air conditioning doesn't work all that well, if it's got air conditioning. They're a little bit loose, the steering doesn't have much precision at all, and it doesn't take too long to make the brakes go away. All of which makes you respect even more the efforts of the racing drivers and the racing teams back in the 1970s. To turn one of these things into a race car and then flog it around Mount Panorama or any other Australian racetrack all day, wow, what a task. These V8 engines of the 1970s, whether it's Ford, whether it's Holden, whether it's Chrysler, they last just about ever with proper care. But unfortunately, proper care is not something that all these cars got during the late 1970s and the early 1980s. In fact, a lot of these cars were pretty much despised. No one cared. These days, however, a lot of people want one, and that's brought values back up. These cars are now worth finding, they're worth restoring, and a good one, such as what we're driving today, is worth well over $100,000. The Ford Falcon hardtop was the last of the Australian big three manufacturer hardtops to be released to the market. It followed the Valiant Charger and the Holden Monaro to market and arrived in August 1972. Reality is, Australian buyers didn't follow their cousins in America by buying lots of these two-doors. And all three two-door Australian coupes were dead by the mid to late 1970s. They were taken off the market. They simply didn't sell, which is a bit of a shame. But that's the way it was back then, and that makes them even more collectible today. So, that's the John Goss Special Ford Falcon hardtop. What do you think of this car? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're there, give us a like and subscribe. This has been Retro Rides. I'm Glenn Torrens. See you in the next episode.